We're doing a monitor display replacement for a Toshiba laptop Satellite A215-S4757. We've removed the external power source, and now we're removing the internal battery so that we have no juice going to the unit. And at this point we'll proceed with the actual replacement of the screen, which requires removing the little rubber screw covers that are in the four corners, and we've removed the four little screws that are there. And at this point we now remove the bezel, which snaps out first along the edge. You have to be careful to unclip the bezel from the bottom and along the top. It's unfortunate, but these two little tabs are very fragile and they break easily. I don't believe they're going to be critical with putting back the bezel. Put the bezel to the side, and now you remove the two retaining screws that are in the upper right hand corners of the display. In this particular case, there are supposed to be two screws holding the back of the screen to the lid, but opening it, I found no screws, so that part of the instructions was not necessary. There are three screws on either side of the display, which I'll remove at this point. With the screws removed, we can now take the display and carefully lay it on the keyboard, and you'll notice that the cable has been connected and taped, and we're going to remove the tape and gently disconnect the connector 30 pin from the display. The connector is held in place by this piece of tape that you had to remove. It was kind of hidden. You couldn't quite tell it was there, and you very carefully remove the connector, and now we have our display mostly removed. We must now disconnect that little inverter, and the display, which was bad, is now removed and may be discarded. Okay, we've positioned a soft cloth to protect the new display. We will, from getting scratched, and now we connect the inverter cable back into its appropriate location. Now at this point we go ahead and reconnect the cable into its spot very carefully, and make sure it lines up properly when we do so. We're putting the tape back down, but just to play it safe, because that tape has been unstickied, we're going to add some new tape to reinforce it. And we're going to reapply some tape down here where the old tape was to keep the ribbon cable in place. Okay, at this point we now place the screen back in its proper location, and we can remove the protective cover. We're going to leave the protective cover in this particular case on while we replace the 6 screws, because it seems that it would actually protect the display and keep it nice. Replacement of the 6 screws, 3 on either side, is a little trickier than the instructions suggest, there are some very fine wires, power wires, on both sides, and you want to be sure not to have the screw heads pinch down those wires when you replace the screws. At this point, we feel comfortable in removing the display protector sheet, and we will reinstall the bezel. At this point, we're going to reinstall the bezel, starting from the bottom and working up around the edges. We did not have the two screws at the very top. They were not provided when we actually opened it up, so it came that way. The bezel snaps back in place a lot easier than it came off, and it looks like the 4 screws that go in the corners are going to hold the screen in place properly. We had to be careful that when we snapped the bottom in, we looked at the back side and indeed had to make sure that it came outside. Without that, the bezel didn't fit in place properly. And we're putting in the last little rubber covers that hide the screws. They are stickied. A little bit of tape on the back side, so that'll help hold them in place. Wonder how many times you can do that without that tape going bad. And we've got that all taken care of. Now we're going to close the lid and look on the back side. Make sure that everything is snapped in place. Check the bezel out all the way around. All of that looks good. And then we'll move forward with installing the battery, reconnecting it with power, and we'll see how it works. Having restored power and everything is powering up properly, we're happy with the results. The only thing that we might add is that if you have little parts and pieces like this left over that have come from behind the display, it's hard to tell whether or not installation caused that, or perhaps that's the actual impact that caused us to replace the screen to begin with.